Oftentimes, I find myself thinking that the majority of teachers in the public school system are not very good teachers, and I'm sure that some are not, but writing this research paper has helped me to realize that there are good and bad teachers everywhere. This research showed me that there definitely are teachers out there that are aware that they are not meeting the needs of all of the students in their classroom, but they are not necessarily sure of how to solve that problem. Today, I will be sharing strategies on how to teach all learning levels in an inclusive classroom. Today, I will tell you about how teachers need to be emotionally involved in the students' lives. I will explain some practical ways to teach all of the students in an inclusive classroom, and I will explain strategies that get the teacher both practically and emotionally involved. But before we get into any of that, what is an inclusive classroom? An inclusive classroom is a classroom that includes students with IEPs. What are IEPs? IEP is short for Individualized Education Program. According to Washington.edu, it is a plan or program developed to ensure that a child who has a disability identified under the law and is attending an elementary or secondary educational institution receives specialized instruction and related services. Okay, so first of all, teachers need to be more emotionally involved, meaning they need to be empathetic and think about how they can help that student even when they're not in the presence of that student. In the article titled, "His Name is Still on My List," Karen Tyler tells a story about her experience with a specific student. She knew that he would need extra attention. She noticed that he had a special skill, beatboxing. She really wanted him to show his talent to the rest of the students at the end of the first semester. Like a little concert, throughout the semester, she paid close attention to him and gave him the help he needed. One day, she got a call on the emergency scanner, and it said that a kid had committed suicide. She soon found out that that kid was the same student that she had poured a lot of her time into, and she had helped a lot. She wondered why he didn't come to her, and if she could have helped him with what he was going through to maybe prevent him from committing suicide. It was not the end of the semester yet, and she wished she could have seen him perform his talent in front of the class. She wished she had allowed him more time in the spotlight. She had so much compassion for this student, but she knew she had to move on with life in the classroom. She said, quote, "As the semester ended, his name appeared on my final exam roster again. This time it reminded me to give the rest of my students time in the spotlight. It reminded me to take time to get to know my students better so I could look more carefully for signs of trouble," end quote. Tyler later noticed that one of her students didn't come to school for a week. She remembered that she wanted to do better with helping her students emotionally, and she tried to get in touch with the absent student. When they finally got in touch with this student, she showed up to school just to drop out. However, this time, Tyler was there to console the child. She spent about 2 hours she sat with the student for 2 hours and heard her pour out her heart about school, her family, and more. Even though it resulted in the child dropping out of school, Tyler learned that it's very important to be there to help students emotionally. Although neither of the students mentioned in the story are said to have IEPs, I think that this is a very good example because it is important to be there for any and every student emotionally. What are some practical ways to teach all of the students in an inclusive classroom? In the article titled "Equal Access for All Learners, Differentiation Simplified," the authors mentioned the 3-phase lesson. This lesson is a strategy for teachers to plan ahead for when students don't know the material in a way that they should. The authors explain it like this, quote, "While the lesson is initially being written, the instructor highlights what may be problematic or simplistic for students and identifies appropriate accommodations while the lesson is still at the planning stage," end quote. Each lesson being taught in school, whether that's in kindergarten or even in college, requires students to have a foundation of prior knowledge regarding that topic in order for them to learn the new material. Students come to school with different skills, abilities, and backgrounds, so some students don't have this prior knowledge that they need. Teachers, therefore, need to prepare to teach their students the necessary foundational knowledge to students that struggle to learn the new concepts. Once the basic concepts are mastered, the student is able to make logical progression towards successful learning in the class. I really liked what the authors of this article had to say about their standards for the students. Quote, "High standards are held for all students. All students can learn, and learning is developmental," end quote. I love this so much because I personally have struggled with learning in a couple different areas. So sometimes when I didn't fully understand a concept that was needed for future learning in that subject, I felt behind and wondered why I didn't understand what the teacher assumed I already knew. This is why I think it is very good that this article addresses this. It is important to make sure the students understand the basic skills before the complex skills. The three phases of the three-phase lesson are called the core lesson, the basic lesson, and the enrichment lesson. The authors Shepard and Acosta-Tello describe the lessons like this. Quote, the core lesson instruction is given to the entire class so that all students are presented with the objectives of the lesson and its corresponding instruction, and equal access to instruction is available to all individuals. The basic lesson allows students to receive additional input if they have either demonstrated a need for intervention by their inability to fully grasp the lesson, or they lack success in accomplishing tasks directly related to the instruction. It provides opportunities for review, remediation, and/or reteaching immediately or as soon as possible after the presentation of the new concepts. During the enrichment lesson, challenging tasks are set forth for the students and can be assigned to specific individuals, or can be made available on a voluntary basis, end quote. What are some other practical ways of teaching all of the students in an inclusive classroom? One is by prioritizing students over the Common Core State Standards, or CCSS. The article titled CCSS, Rigor or Righteousness in Special Education explained that some teachers, when writing an IEP, struggle with making sure that the student is having all of his or her needs met while still making sure that they are meeting all of the criteria for the CCSS. One teacher stated that she knew her students well and that was the foundation of making the IEPs for her students. But I'll tell you more about teachers needing to know their students well later. Something else that I discovered from my research is that treating IEP students as regular people is effective. This makes sense to me because who wants to be treated like they're special in a way that is very patronizing? Students that have IEPs need attention like any student, but if you give them too much attention, like when they don't need it, then that is patronizing to them. Students need to know that they are just as capable of learning what is difficult for them as anyone else in the classroom. This is why I think it is very important that teachers pour into their students and make them aware that their worth is not tied to their learning difficulties. Teachers need to encourage all of their students, whether they have learning difficulties or not. Students need to be encouraged. They need to know that they are capable of achieving amazing things. IEP students should also be aware that there is help when they need it. They do not need to feel like they are helpless. Speaking from my own experience, to have a teacher there to guide you and help you learn at whatever pace necessary is extremely uplifting. When a teacher takes the extra time to teach students at a slower pace, it shows the students that they are both worth the time and that the teacher cares. Lastly, what are some strategies that allow the teacher to be more practically and emotionally involved? Knowing their students well and giving them enough attention. I kind of mentioned both of these strategies earlier, but let's go a little more in depth. My mother is a wonderful example of knowing her students well. She homeschooled my two siblings and me for the majority of our schooling years. Even before we were aware of my learning difficulties, my mom always noticed what things kept me from being interested in learning for the subject at hand. For example, when I was little, I was almost never interested in books that had a male main character. I don't know why I was like that, and I did grow out of it, but nevertheless, my mom noticed. So to ensure that I would still enjoy reading my reading books and actually learn from them, she adjusted the curriculum. About 90% of the time, she gave me a reading book with a female main character. All this to say, she knew me well and made sure that I would still learn despite my strange preferences. In the classroom, teachers need to know their students well in the sense of paying attention to when the students look like they are struggling. If they know their students really well, then they should be able to discern what is the best attempt to reteach the struggling student. In conclusion, in order for teachers to be able to teach all of the students in an inclusive classroom, they must do several things. They must be willing to help the students emotionally and to prioritize students over the CCSS. They must treat IEP students as normal people while still showing availability to help. They should use the three-phase lesson, know their students well, and give them enough attention. Thank you.